Well, hello. My name is Matt Mueller. I am a bass, and I will be participating in Martial Opera's upcoming concert series that connects young, up-and-coming performers with more established composers in the new music realm. And I am very pleased to be here with Judith Shatin, the esteemed uh, professor emerita from University of Virginia and composer who I'll be working with and performing one of her pieces from a song set called Weiter und Weiter, and we'll talk more about that later. Judith is a very inventive and very curious composer, great curiosity and intellectual depth. She draws influences from a wide range of sources, literary texts, current events, and all sorts of other things. And what I found just through listening and looking into your music a little bit is that you have a very unusual way of bridging a gap between very complex, detailed scores with highly advanced musical techniques, and yet maintaining an evocativeness and immediacy that makes your music very accessible. I think it's very interesting. So I definitely want to talk about how you marry those two things together. Um, but before we do that, I just want to read a little bit from your bio, if that's all right, just to introduce you to the people and let everybody understand sort of who you are and where you're coming from. So, composer Judith Shatin is renowned for her richly imagined music that seamlessly spans acoustic and digital realms. Called highly inventive on every level by the Washington Post, her music combines an adventurous approach to timbre with dynamic narrative design and a keen awareness of the sonic landscape of modern life. She draws on fascinations with literature, the visual arts, the sounding world, and music's social and communicative power to craft a clear, direct musical language that resonates with performers and audiences worldwide. Her extensive catalog includes chamber, choral, and orchestral music, and electronic, electroacoustic, and multimedia pieces. Her compositions are performed in concert halls and at festivals such as Carnegie Hall, the Concertgebouw, the Kennedy Center, Aspen, Bam Next Wave, and many others. She has been commissioned by organizations and acclaimed ensembles, including the Barlow Endowment, the Fromm Foundation, Kronos Quartet, Da Capo Chamber Players, and the American Composers Orchestra. Her musical honors include 4 National Endowment for the Arts Composer Fellowships and grants from the American Music Center, Meet the Composer, the Virginia Commission for the Arts, and the Lila Wallace Reader's Digest Arts Partners Program. She has conducted residencies at Bellagio, La Cité Internationale des Arts, MacDowell, and Yaddo. Judith is currently William R. Kennan Jr. Professor Emerita at the University of Virginia, where she founded the Virginia Center for Contemporary Music. So, very lengthy and impressive list of accomplishments. And I would love to get through some of those. We can't possibly touch on all of them in 30 minutes, but first, I'd love to start at the beginning. Thank you again for being here. And I would love to know just very simply, where are you from? What's your family background?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. My family background, I'm one of 4 daughters. My father was a clinical psychologist, and my mother did her PhD in medical bacteriology. So unusual, I think, from that background to wind up as a composer. When I was a very young child, my father was working with a group of musicians, and they said to him, "You have 4 daughters, you should have a piano." So they purchased an old upright, and I was drawn to it from an early age. And I studied piano and flute growing up, and I will say that had I not, during formative years, lived in Albany, New York, and then later South Orange, New Jersey, it's unlikely I would have gone into music. Both of those public school systems were terrific. They had band, they had instruments that you could borrow. I sang in chorus, I played in the orchestra. It was a very active musical environment. I also did have private lessons in piano and for a shorter period on flute. But what was available in the public schools was really critical to me. And it is really sad to me that so many do not any longer have those kinds of opportunities. There are just little pockets because unfortunately we live in a society that does not value the arts as they should. So at any rate, that gives you a bit of my background. I did my undergraduate education at Douglas College of Rutgers University, and I started out life there as a piano major because that was the only option. But I studied composition my junior year with Robert Maves, M-O-E-V-S, a very distinguished composer who deserves to be much better known. And I really loved it. So I went to the chair of the music department and said, I would like to do a senior recital in composition. Well, that didn't go over too well, but eventually they said, okay, if you play one piece, you find the musicians, you organize the rehearsals, basically you do it, we'll let you. And they did. And I did. And I never looked back after that. And I really feel very grateful that I had the opportunity to spend several summers at the Aspen Music Festival, hearing all kinds of contemporary as well as traditional music, going to master classes with amazing performers like the singer Jan DeGaetani. And I was a fellow 2 summers at Tanglewood. And I did my master's at Juilliard. And as we discussed earlier, yes, I studied for 1 year there with Milton Babbitt. And I was very excited about that because I had taken a course with him in Schoenberg and Stravinsky, and it was revelatory. And I will say the following because many people ask me about this. Milton Babbitt was not someone who expected you to be a clone. He didn't expect you to compose the way he did, and of course, I never have. But I think he was formed himself by an experience with Roger Sessions, who was his teacher and who did not appreciate his music, at least at that time. But he was really had such an encyclopedia of a mind, such a rich mind. I really enjoyed working with him. And I decided then to continue my education at Princeton to do my PhD. I always wished that there were a way to kind of combine the amazing performance world of a conservatory with the richer dive into conceptual domains that a place like Princeton had. I'm still looking for that. I hope to create it at the University of Virginia. It's just very difficult to marry those aspects. We have certainly tried, and I think in some ways managed to move in that direction well. But it's challenging, there's no doubt, because performance takes so much time, as does the sort of thinking about in the scholarly and musicological compositional worlds. So doing both is challenging. Certainly there are many people who manage it, though.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Um, it's good and interesting to know that that was Milton Babbitt's disposition towards teaching, that he wasn't so doctrinaire, because I think if he was, there'd be a lot of very frustrated composers out there trying to do what he could do, which is extremely difficult and perhaps not always rewarding.
Well,
Um,
one of the things that I'm not so sure of is that he said, whatever you can conceive, you can perceive. And I don't think that's the case because our perceptual systems and our conceptual systems are really quite different. The other thing is that I have always been more fascinated by timbre than I think he was, although of course his explorations in digital music were a huge, huge step and created major progress in that direction. In fact, I saw the old synthesizer he used that took up a whole room basically at Columbia, and how he would have to type in with get this tape printed out. It was very complex. And in fact, the intensity of desire of early composers who wanted to explore the digital domain is really amazing. You had to really want to do that and have the curiosity and passionate desire to do it, to put up with the technique, whether it was using that kind of system or even, cutting up tape, using tape. I mean, I did that briefly when I was an undergraduate and I hated it. I've got to tell you, like these little bits of tape that you had to very carefully tape together with this special tape and keeping track of bits of tape. I'm amazed that composers like Davidovsky would do that, given the exactitude of his electronics. And composers such as Babbitt and Davidovsky were really very engaged with making very particular kinds of sounds. Whereas with Cage, I think it was perhaps easier because there was a lot of, he would have parties to put together these bits of tape. So there was not the same kind of approach. I mean, it was really a different approach to what kind of result you were looking for.
Right. He was essentially trying to remove himself from the choosing process in terms of so directly picking the sounds. Um, but it's interesting you're talking about splicing together these bits of tape, but I feel like, in today's world, people in my generation and even younger generations, we, as technology progresses, it becomes further and further and further abstracted from the physical processes that underlie it all that make it work. And I imagine that having that experience, that tactile, very direct manipulation of the technology has to give you a particular perspective on those techniques and how
Yes,
it all comes together.
no. And I did not harass my students with giving them the experience of trying to do that. No, because the tape is already totally removed. And the bottom line is it's about our ears and what we judge
Mhm.
with our ears. And what kinds of sounds we're using and processing. And so I really have to say that although of course it's a different experience than it is composing for people to perform, it's in many ways, I think it's very tactile in relation to hearing. And I'm very slow at doing electronic music because I usually start by trying to create the universe of the kinds of timbres I'm going to use. That takes me a ferocious amount of time because you can't know until you've explored exactly what that universe can be. And then within that universe, you have to decide what you are going to use and how as you structure a composition. So I always have a lot more options than I want to use or can use.
Mhm.
So I think the big issue that's problematic for contemporary digital techniques is it's so easy to cut and paste, and it is so easy to use tempi that if you're combining electronics with live performers, you don't necessarily realize that the kind of tempi that you might be working with digitally are um, problematic.
Well, it seems like you have done a fair bit of work to try and make the using computers in music a little bit easier for successive generations with your work with the Center for Computer Music. Um, is that was that one of the guiding uh, principles, or is that one of the reasons that you decided to put that whole organization together to make it more accessible and easier, more immediate to use?
Well, I will say the following. When I was a graduate student at Princeton, I was already very interested in computer music, and it was very early in the development of that technology, although the wonderful work of Max Matthews, who was just an amazing person, really led the way for us. But it was back in the early era when you had to type stacks of note cards with all the parameters you were using, and then that would be read by a machine, and a digital tape would be created that then would be read by a digital analog converter that you could get to in the engineering department in the middle of the night, kind of thing. And it was frustrating, and I never created music that I believed in using that technology. But somehow I thought that it would get better down the road. And in 1987, there was an opportunity to apply for grants to use new technologies in various domains. And I went, MIDI had just come out. That is the ability of synthesizers and computers to talk to one another. And I went to a store that sold MIDI devices in New York and sort of parked myself there until I learned enough to write the grant proposal, which was funded so I could start the Virginia Center for Computer Music. I certainly had plenty of help in doing that from colleagues in the computing department, and then I never looked back. I mean, we started with a couple of Mac SEs and an Amiga, which may be familiar to some people. And then gradually, of course, we went through a whole bunch of different computing technologies and programs, and things kept evolving. Now, one of the problems about that is that, pieces that you might do with one type of device, when that device went away, then there was always the issue of trying to transform it. And for me, it's always meant, and continues to mean, thinking twice about what I want to do with interactive technologies. I only use them if I want to affect the sound of the instrument, as in a piece I did for solo bass drum and optional interactive electronics. All of the electronics are about changing the sound of the instrument. Otherwise, I prefer to use fixed media, that is, making recordings, and having multiple cues is something that I frequently do. However, if once you have those recordings, there's not so much of an issue of the changing technology. But for interactive technologies, as the devices change, as programs change, then you have to be concerned about how you're going to use that in the future, or you have to accept the fact, as I have in some cases, that it's really not worth making those changes. But given how much effort I put into each piece, and how part of it to me is loving to encounter different performers and their varied interpretations, because I always look at performance as collaboration. So I like that part of composing. But to me, it's really not either or, it's always and. I don't see any, I love composing for acoustic instruments, voice, you name it, I'll try it. And I love working with digital media, and I do, some just acoustic, just digital, and then I do some that combines them. So for instance, one piece I did, you were speaking about curiosity. I have a lot of it, maybe too much sometimes, but I was playing with a zipper on a jacket and I thought it made a really interesting sound. So that led through a long circuitous route to composing a piece called Zipper Music for up to 4 amplified zipper players and interactive electronics. So you never know where some experience is going to lead you.
Great. So when I'm looking for a zipper player, you can refer me to the foremost virtuosi in the field.
Well, one of the things actually that I love about doing, this is a part of a series called Quotidian Music, and you do not have to be a musician to play this music. You have to be able to count, usually to like 3 or 4. I think most people can manage that. And you have to be able to collaborate with other people, and that's really about it. one of the hardest things was figuring out how to create a new notation because there was no way I could notate the kinds of actions and rhythms that I wanted using traditional musical notation.
Well, you mentioned that for you, it's really not about the technology or about using really advanced techniques. It's about the sound, and you're open to doing that any way that you can get that sound, that impact that you're looking for. That's what you want. And in a number of your vocal pieces that I've listened to, including Weiter und Weiter, it's not so much about the electronic technology, but you do use some interesting extended techniques, manipulating strings, meeting them with the finger, and things like that, to evoke a certain feeling. Um, However, I want to circle back to something you just said about uh, being inclusive, right? That with the zipper music, you don't have to be a musician, even you just have to count, be on time, be collaborative, and there's a certain element in your work that I've noticed that is very colloquial, and it's interested in the concerns of uh, everyday people who may or may not have any interest in the ivory tower that is Western art music, right?
Oh, first, wait a minute. I want to take big exception to that ivory tower art music because seriously, I think it really troubles me. I mean, when I was a child, there was nobody telling me I should listen to this type or that type of music or that this music wasn't for me. And I just loved what I really don't even like the term, but I loved music that came out of the traditions of European as well as American cultures. And I want to have that be available to people much more than it is. So I would say the following. I'm interested in my music having perspicuity. What do I mean by that? I mean, I want people to be able to understand it as they are listening to it. I don't use difficulty for its own sake. I use uh, advanced techniques, more virtuosic techniques as they are important to expression. I don't use them for their own sake. That doesn't interest me. I know that there are many people who are intrigued by that. So my music ranges from rather, I don't even want to use the word simple. I want to use the word maybe radically consonant to radically dissonant. Again, I feel like the operative word for me is and. I don't see any reason why I need to exclude certain intervals or certain rhythms, whether they be on the more open end or, with a lot of sort of space and registral color or dense and naughty. I just don't think it's one or the other. So I've actually always found that there are some people for whom my music is way too simple. Why would we bother? And just as often, way too complex. This is too complex. Sorry, we can't program it. So, it's just, I have to do my own music and then let those chips fall where they fall.
I think that's a great attitude to have. It's very easy, not just as a composer, but as a performer as well, I think, to be caught up in the expectations or the perceived expectations of others. And that's maybe the quickest way to stifle creativity. So
I completely agree. I mean, I cannot tell you the joy that I have in collaborating with performers where we're messing around, playing and trying things. I love that experience, and my music is so much the better for it. And even with my own instrument, piano, which I still play regularly, I'm always experimenting. In fact, I'm working on a piece now, a horn trio for horn, cello, and piano. And I just found some things I hadn't tried before on the piano. I mean, there's just always more. And again, it's just always in the service of what the expression is about. And especially in text setting, but in general, different kinds of inspirations and aspirations require different expression. And some people say to me, well, you're very frequently motivated by extra musical ideas. And that is absolutely true because I think that music has a certain metaphorical aspect to it, as does our thinking. I think a lot about the book Metaphors We Live by Lakoff and Johnson. And I really feel like in music, it can speak metaphorically, and that's an important aspect to me. And also, I do have a lot of curiosity. My antenna are kind of always up, and ideas just come from who knows where. Um, but I feel like shape and design and concept for me are often linked to some experience, um, whether it's from seeing something, hearing something, thinking about something. I mean, those are all places that ideas just come from.
Hmm. Do you think that that sort of openness and that like holistic approach to creating music, is that something that you always had, or is that something that sort of you found over the course of your career?
I think it's something that evolved and that I've always had the interest in timbre. I just have very sensitive hearing, so I've always been fascinated by that. But I think over the course of my uh, journey in music, I've become freer and freer. I just don't care what others think about what I do. I mean, that said, of course, I do care about how people respond to my work, but I also don't feel like I have a lot of control over that. But people seem to respond to it uh, with enthusiasm, and I'm pleased about that. But I feel like for me, I'm asked, well, would you keep composing if you couldn't hear it? My answer to that is probably no. So it's part of this circle of curiosity, exploration, creation, and sharing. And so all of those are important to me.
So I want to jump a little bit into martial opera and sort of intro that a little bit. This is a wonderful new company I'm excited to work with, and they have a stated purpose that is to entertain and inspire diverse audiences with compelling productions of new and neglected opera, mostly American, to support opera creators and performers with opportunities and guidance as they make new work, and foster conversation that contextualizes and illuminates the evolving opera scene. So, with that in mind, what do you think are some challenges in that pursuit? And the second part, it's a two-parter, is why is that worthwhile? Why go to the trouble?
Well, I think it's an absolutely terrific goal. And one of the things that seems clear to me is that there is a kind of renaissance in opera. There's much more being created now. And the idea of finding opera that and dramatic works that merit attention and performance um, is still super important because it's very easy, given given the handful of opera composers who are paid attention to miss a lot of terrific work. So I think that their goal is admirable. What was the second part of your question?
Um, I think you addressed that very well about why it's worthwhile, but maybe to the first part, what do you think are some of the challenges associated with trying to bring that to the fore and especially to bring people to it? Something that is often perceived as inaccessible or hard to understand, maybe, or perhaps not even appealing.
Well, I think the word opera has a lot of baggage. That is certainly the case. However, I think that working with the kinds of topics that might draw people in. Also, one of the challenges, of course, is funding for this kind of enterprise, because as soon as you are dealing with creating sets, that can be an issue. But I think that that's surmountable by having either no sets or very limited sets, and making the drama be about the interaction that actors have. I do think however, there's also a plus, because if people are not just standing there singing, a singing recital is also maybe to some extent challenging. But when you also have action with it, and also a lot can be done now with simple projections. So again, using technologies that help make things easier, I think is worthwhile. There is a local opera company here in Charlottesville, Victory Hall Opera, and they have done really well. They're very innovative. And again, it's chamber opera, and they have created multiple ways to engage with the community. So I do think that there certainly are options here, and I do think that people are excited about dramatic work. And so channeling that aspect and finding ways to reach out to the community. I mean, in that sense, it's really not different from um, trying to engage audiences. And I don't know whether this is ultimately going to be feasible, but I think to the extent that it's possible to send even excerpts into schools, I think one of the issues is you've got to find ways to help people encounter this so they think, oh, I really like that. And when they have the opportunity to experience an opera, I mean, one of the first major opera I heard was through a field trip when I was in high school. And it was to see the Magic Flute at the Met. And it was an amazing experience. And I was very fortunate to have it. But I've also seen that small productions that can go into schools can be really effective as well.
Hmm. Yeah, even things like, Three Little Pigs or something like that, something that uh, gets young people just turned on to the whole idea of it in the first place. It can really plant a seed, and I think that's in large part why so many companies around the country are really um, much more committed to doing outreach and stuff than they were maybe 15 years ago. Um, so I hope that that continues and continues to grow. I'm going to now put on my biased singer hat and assert that I think one of the reasons that sometimes new opera or new music and new vocal music in general can people find difficult is there is a lot of composers out there who don't necessarily have a good intuition for how to write for the voice and showcase a vocal line that can really speak, that a performer can really sink their instrument into to convey the meaning. And I think that you do an excellent job of that. And I'm wondering how you think about writing for the voice, how you get to that point, because it's not easy and not everybody can do that.
Well, for one, I sang in choirs, and I was never a soloist or anything, but I think that helped. For two, I try out the vocal lines myself. I mean, I can't do them really. I always get a sore throat, but I want to make sure that they are singable. Now, I also I've written a fair amount of vocal music. I did, as I mentioned earlier, I did an opera that was commissioned by the Ash Lawn Festival here outside of Charlottesville, well now in Charlottesville, that was based on a Molière play, Les Précieuses Ridicules. And I was mentioning earlier, one of my favorite lines is people of quality know everything without ever having studied anything. So fun. I mean, Molière is great. So I did a chamber opera based on that. And I think to me, text is very important. I want people to understand text. So whether I'm composing for chorus or a solo voice, I want to make sure that the voice is not just part of the mix, but that it's possible to project the text. And beyond that, I have studied a lot of vocal and choral literature. In fact, because I kind of was unhappy with the idea that composition courses are pretty exclusively devoted to acoustic composition, so I created a course in choral composition at UVA, and I also created the first course in songwriting at UVA. So those are just very important to me, and thinking about voice, learning about tessitura, understanding not only what works for the voice, but where where you need to be careful about what you are asking people of a particular vocal quality to do. And I think not enough effort is put into teaching that. And then I've had some wonderful singers to collaborate with me. So if I ever got something wrong, they were very quick to enlighten me. So all of
Yeah,
those together, I think, have led me to the kind of expressive quality that I'm going for with the voice. But you know, it's very interesting. There are certain pieces like Eight Songs for a Mad King of Peter Maxwell Davies that are very, very tough, I think, on the voice, but they're also very powerful pieces. So I don't want to say that using extended techniques, for instance, per se is wrong at all. I just think one needs to be careful about how one does it. But I also think that many composers who haven't worked much with setting text just have no clue that even something as obvious as making sure that there's a lineup between important pitches and words happen in relation to the rhythm, you know? So with early students, I'll frequently see something like the word of, which has the high point and rhythmic emphasis. And no, you want a word that matters to have that kind of positioning.
yeah, you're preaching right now. I've had all these experiences with new music, so I hope some composers are listening. I know that we have some very fine vocal music writers who are going to be featured on this concert, so I'm excited to hear everybody as well as take part, of course. Um, so okay, we are coming close to the end, so I want to make sure to ask you, um, where can people find you? What are some things coming up if people are interested in hearing or learning more about your work?
Sure, thank you so much. Well, first of all, they can visit my website, which is surprise, surprise, judithshatin.com. And there is information about all the pieces that I have that are currently available there. As to my work, as you've mentioned before, I really work in many different domains. What I have upcoming, in addition to this performance that you will sing a movement of weiter and weiter, which means farther and farther, and it is both a phrase in the first poem by Avram Sutzkever, and it is also a kind of metaphor for I felt about composing the piece, that I was being drawn further and further into this world. Um, so I also have a performance of a piece called Ice Becomes Water at Old Dominion University at the beginning of October, and that is scored for string orchestra and electronics fashioned from field recordings shared by a glaciologist. It's one of several pieces that I have done that respond to climate change. And I guess my goal in creating these pieces is to help people think about and become more aware of the issue, although it's certainly the case at this point with the calamities that we are experiencing on a daily level that we are, of course, becoming more aware of it. But I have found it important to respond to many aspects of the world around us. I did a choral piece called La Frontera, the Border, which is a setting of a Spanish poem by a young person who was trying to immigrate and caught up in maximum security detention. Another piece that I have coming up is called Piping the Earth, and it's scored for orchestra and will be performed by the Quad City Symphony. And I also have a number of chamber pieces coming up, and we shall see. There are plans in progress for songs as well. So again, I love working with a variety of different kinds of ensembles and genres. Text setting is very important to me. I mentioned I have a monodrama called Patterns for soprano and piano that was commissioned by singer Amy Johnson and uses the very powerful text by Amy Lowell. So it's really fascinating to me to rove around the possible world of what music allows us to create and to experience.
Wonderful. Thank you. So many interesting projects out there and available. I've listened to some of this stuff. It's really good. It deserves to be heard. So if you have a chance to check out a concert, do it. Okay. Okay, a couple quick hitters just for fun before we sign off. Favorite poet or poem?
You know, I really can't answer that, but I will tell you about one poet that I really love is Charles Wright.
Okay.
And check out his last volume, Caribou, which is a really elegiac kind of book of poems, very powerful.
What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? I am just finishing Faulkner's Light in August, which is an absolutely extraordinary, wild, fascinating book.
Who is a composer who is not listened to or programmed enough?
Wow, where should I start? Well, I will mention a composer that I just met. He is programmed a fair amount in Europe, not that much here, Anders Hillborg, who is a Swedish composer. Then I'm going to mention an American composer, Anne Calloway, who is he's based in the Berkeley, California area. And I also will mention an organization that will help people find underperformed music by women, and that is the International Alliance for Women in Music, IAWM.org, which is a terrific organization. Even I will say that even though I do serve on the board of advisors, but composers, musicologists, performers, anyone interested in music by women, they have an outstanding website, journal, and are very active in promoting the work of music by women and performed by and explored by women. And I've been very fortunate when I think of some of the women who are not well known enough to really explore this whole world. There are so many underperformed people, of course, not just women. I think that in general, and especially in America, where there is not the kind of pressure on large organizations to perform contemporary music that there is in many ways in Europe. So I think that the work of the Marshall Opera Company and of so many others, like the Stanton Music Festival, where Weiter and Weiter was just performed, are really critical to the musical life of our country.
Wonderful. Well, I think we have reached our conclusion. I want to thank you so much for generously sharing your time and experiences. Is there any final word that you would like to add?
No, would like to thank you for the care you've taken in crafting the questions you have asked me. They've been very provocative and very far-reaching.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure and a lot of fun. I cannot wait to dive deeper into your music, and I hope to see you and many of you who are watching this recording at the concert in October. Take care.
Thank you so much.